Something big is about to happen, they said with smiles stretched too wide, like wrapping paper on a gift you already suspect is hollow. My family rarely remembered my birthday without the help of Facebook reminders or my mother's neat red pen notes in her planner. But that year, my 35th, they were almost giddy. Everyone showed up early. Cousins who hadn't replied to my texts in years, my sister Julia wearing the same perfume our mother wore when she was in a particularly controlling mood, even my father, who usually refused to leave his recliner unless someone promised cake or confrontation. I should have known. The party was hosted at my brother Daniel's house, the only place big enough to accommodate everyone. I had brought my own candles, not because I expected anyone to forget, but because I no longer trusted them to remember me correctly. It was my quiet way of reclaiming some small ritual. I placed them atop the cake I'd baked myself, dark chocolate with lavender glaze, my favorite. Nobody commented on the flavor. As I blew out the candles, I wished for silence. The kind of peace that wraps around you like a blanket after a storm, not the silence I knew all too well, the cold one that follows betrayal. Big changes, my Aunt Linda had said, her eyes bright in a way that made my stomach turn. You're finally going to be part of something important. She meant it like a gift, but it tasted like a warning. That night, when I returned home to my small two-bedroom house, the one I'd bought after saving for nearly a decade, I found it exactly as I'd left it. Too quiet. I slipped off my shoes by the door and paused when I noticed something odd. My mail, usually piled up in its usual chaotic tower, had been neatly stacked. Touched. Then I saw it. A photograph. Old. Curled at the edges like it had been tucked away in a drawer for years. It was placed in the center of my dining table as if it had walked there on its own. In the picture, I was 8 years old. Standing barefoot in the backyard of our childhood home with my arms wrapped tightly around a dog I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Buster. He had died the same week my parents told me they couldn't afford art camp, but somehow managed to fund Daniel's football trip to Florida. Behind me in the photo stood someone else. Blurred. Faint like a ghost. I stared harder. It was Julia, but younger. And her eyes weren't on me, they were fixed on the camera. Smiling, knowing. Something in my chest tightened. On the back, scrawled in a shaky hand that wasn't mine, were the words. It started before you ever noticed. I slept with the hallway light on that night. 5 days later, my phone exploded. Missed calls. Unread texts. Voicemails stacking one over another like dominoes of panic. My sister. My cousin. Even Daniel. Messages filled with confusion, regret, and something else, fear. Something had happened. Or maybe it had unraveled. I didn't open any of them right away. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding that photograph in my hand. I traced the fading outline of my own smile, wondering how many times I'd mistaken being included for being seen. And as the phone buzzed and blinked beside me, I knew. This wasn't the beginning. This was the reckoning. The messages poured in like a storm that had been building for years, voice notes, texts, even a few emails. Call me, please. Where are you? It's not what it looks like. That one made me laugh, a sharp sound that startled even me in the quiet room. I hadn't told anyone yet that I knew what to look for. That I'd been watching their shadows grow longer for years, even as they insisted there was no fire behind me. I didn't respond. Not yet. Not before I found out what they were trying so hard to get ahead of. I started with Julia's voicemail. Her voice, usually honeyed and sure, cracked around the edges. Please, don't post anything. I know you found the picture. I don't know how it ended up at your place, but Mom's been freaking out. We didn't mean for you to find out like this. Find out what, Julia? I let the silence answer for her. Daniel's message was even more cryptic. Look, if this is about Dad's will, we can talk. It wasn't personal, okay? Just call me. Before this gets out of hand. The will. I hadn't even known there was a will. Our father had been very much alive the last time I checked, watching a rerun of Wheel of Fortune with a bowl of pistachios balanced on his stomach like a crown of domestic indifference. I opened the group chat next. The one ironically titled Fam Bam Re Heart, where no one had spoken directly to me in months, unless they needed something. There were 38 unread messages. Julia, she knows. Cousin Lauren, who told her? Daniel, it doesn't matter. We need to get ahead of it. Aunt Linda, I warned you this would happen. Julia, should we go over there? She's probably freaking out. Daniel, too late. She always freaks out. She always freaks out. That one stung. I could almost hear his voice, its lazy disdain. The way he said it at Thanksgiving once, when I excused myself from dinner early after Mom had spent 10 minutes praising Julia's new job and said nothing when I mentioned my promotion. I stood in my kitchen now, looking out the window at the brittle winter sky, that photo still trembling in my hand like a wounded bird. I didn't freak out then, Daniel. I folded my napkin neatly, kissed Mom on the cheek, and drove home in the snow. There's a difference. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept that picture on my nightstand like it might whisper answers if I listened closely enough. Instead, it stared at me with the wide, innocent eyes of my 8-year-old self, eyes that didn't yet know betrayal wears the face of someone you trust. By morning, I'd made my decision. I drove to the family home, the one with the peeling white shutters and the hydrangeas that never quite bloomed right. I let myself in with the spare key tucked behind the chipped garden gnome. No one was there. The house felt strange in its silence, like a stage before a play. I walked through the rooms I once knew like the back of my hand. Each one betrayed tiny signs of panic: an overturned lamp, a drawer left half open, mail scattered like they'd left in a hurry. Then I saw it. On the coffee table, among half-drunk cups of coffee and a folder of tax documents, was another photograph. This one was older, black and white. Our mother, barely 18, standing in front of a courthouse with a man I'd never seen before. Not our father. And behind them a little girl. Me. Labeled on the back in faded ink. Final day. Olivia goes with her. The rest of the ink had smudged, but the damage was done. This was no longer about forgotten birthdays or withheld affection. This was about a secret. A lie that had been dressed as love for 35 years. And suddenly, I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was the key to something they had built their lives around hiding. The man in the photograph was tall, broad-shouldered, with an angular jaw and eyes like mine, dark but curious. Not the eyes of the man who raised me, who smelled of motor oil and always seemed to be looking through me instead of at me. I sat on the living room floor, the old carpet imprinting its pattern on the back of my legs, and stared at that photo as if it might blink and confess everything. It didn't. So I went looking for more. I knew where the family kept their important documents. A faux antique chest in the upstairs hall, wedged between boxes of Christmas decorations and a collection of broken umbrellas. I'd gone digging in there once as a child, searching for my birth certificate after a classmate insisted I'd been adopted. I never found it, but now I understood why. At the bottom of the chest, beneath faded passports and yellowed report cards, I found an envelope marked private, do not discard. My mother's handwriting. Inside was a stack of papers, legal documents, affidavits, and a letter. The letter was addressed to my mother, dated 1989. Catherine. As agreed, I've signed over all rights. Olivia is yours to raise. She deserves better than a court battle. Please don't contact me again. There was no signature. No full name. Just that one damning promise. I read it twice, then again. My heart was beating so loud I could barely hear anything else. They hadn't adopted me. They'd taken me. Or maybe bartered for me. And they never intended for me to know. I should have felt broken. But all I felt was a strange, quiet rage. The kind that simmers for decades and sharpens your vision. I went to the attic next, the one place no one ever bothered to clean. It still smelled of old books and mothballs. I climbed past the forgotten furniture and boxes marked seasonal and found what I didn't even know I was looking for: a journal. Not mine. My mother's. The leather cover was cracked, the pages brittle, but her cursive was still sharp as a blade. June 12, 1990, she called today. Said she saw Olivia's photo in the newspaper from her school recital. I reminded her of our agreement. She hung up crying. August 3, 1992, Richard says we need to stop sending updates. It's confusing for Olivia. But how can I erase a woman who still remembers her favorite lullaby? And then, the last entry I could bear to read. October 14, 1997, Olivia found the photo again. Asked who the man was. I said it was a family friend. I watched the way her face fell. God forgive me. I closed the journal and sat in the dust and the dark and cried for that little girl. Not just for what was hidden from her, but for how long she blamed herself for feeling out of place in her own home. When I stepped back outside, dusk had settled like a hush over the neighborhood. The house behind me stood still, unaware that its silence had finally spoken. I didn't go home right away. I drove. No destination in mind. Just the road, winding and indifferent. I passed the diner where I used to meet Julia after school. The library where I hid during family fights. And finally, without planning it, I pulled into the driveway of the only person who might still hold a piece of the truth. Aunt Evelyn. My mother's estranged sister. The one who hadn't been at any family gathering in a decade. The one they called dramatic, unstable, too emotional. I used to believe them. But now I needed her. She opened the door slowly, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing a cardigan that looked older than me. She looked surprised, but not at all unprepared. I was wondering how long it would take you to come knocking, she said softly, stepping aside. As I crossed her threshold, I knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Of the truth. Of a new story. Mine. Her home smelled of lavender and wood polish, like time itself had curled up for a nap in the corners. Every inch was lined with books, spines cracked, titles faded, but none of them for show. This was a house that had seen solitude and made peace with it. I hadn't seen Aunt Evelyn since I was 17, the year she and my mother stopped speaking altogether. There were rumors, of course. Whispers traded like currency at family reunions. She was always jealous. She couldn't handle Mom's success. She drinks too much. But now, standing in her doorway, I saw none of that. Just a woman who had once held me on her lap and read fairy tales in voices so rich they lingered in the air even after she left the room. She gestured to a chair by the fireplace. Sit. You look like someone who's been told the moon isn't real. I didn't speak right away. I couldn't. The photograph, the journal, the letter, they spun in my mind like leaves in a storm. Finally, I just said it. I found the photo. The one with him in it. Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders sagged. So, she said. You know. It wasn't a question. I nodded, the words sticking in my throat. Who was he? Evelyn moved slowly to the mantel, picking up a small silver frame. She handed it to me. Another photograph, one I'd never seen. The same man, younger. Standing on a beach, holding a baby with a bright red hat. His name was Marcus Delaney, she said, sitting across from me. He was your father. Your real one. I stared at the picture. Not because it shocked me. I think, somewhere deep down, I always knew. But because the baby he held wasn't just a memory now. It was me. I don't understand, I said. Why would he give me up? Evelyn sighed, a sound worn from years of waiting. He didn't. Not really. He was young. Poor. Your mother had married Richard already. He was older, established. They had a situation. You came from that. Catherine told Marcus she'd raise you as hers and Richard's. That it was for your best chance. And Marcus, scared and alone, believed her. But why lie for so long? Because your mother didn't just want to raise you. She wanted to erase him. To pretend you were part of her perfect picture. And when Marcus asked questions, when he showed up at your school that one time, she threatened legal action. He couldn't fight her. He was drowning. And your father, Richard, he didn't love you, Olivia. He tolerated you. That's the harshest truth of all. A cold wave broke over me. I gripped the photo so tightly I thought the frame might crack. All this time, I whispered. I thought I was the problem. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. You were never the problem. You were the threat. Because you remembered. You asked questions. You didn't play the role. I wanted to scream. To go back and tell every version of my younger self that the shame didn't belong to her. That the silence wasn't her punishment, it was their armor. Instead, I asked, is he still alive? Marcus. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Last I heard, he's in Oregon. Owns a small bookstore near Ashland. He never remarried. Said he couldn't after losing you. I stood slowly, the weight of 1,000 false memories falling from my shoulders. I need to find him. She nodded. I thought you might. As I walked back to my car under a sky painted in twilight, I realized I wasn't chasing a man. I was chasing the part of myself they buried with the lie. I drove through the night, westward. Toward Oregon, toward a name I had only just reclaimed. Marcus Delaney. The syllables felt foreign in my mouth, like tasting a fruit I'd only ever heard described. I said it out loud once, quietly in the car, and it startled me how much it sounded like a prayer. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Let them flood my inbox, let them knock on my door. The girl they thought they could contain had disappeared into the wind, and in her place stood a woman with a new name stitched quietly into her soul. As the highway stretched ahead, dark and endless, I thought of all the birthdays I'd spent wondering why I felt half present in my own skin. I thought of Richard's disapproving scowls, my mother's silence, Julia's manipulations dressed as sisterhood. I thought of the photo left like a breadcrumb. And I thought of Marcus. What would I even say to him? Hi. I'm the daughter you gave away. No. That wasn't right. Hi. I'm the daughter they took from you. That was closer. By the time I reached Ashland, morning had begun to press light against the hills. The town was quiet, almost reverent. I passed bakeries just opening, the scent of coffee and fresh bread wrapping around me like a soft blanket. I felt something in my chest stir, not joy. Not yet, but possibility. The bookstore was easy to find. Delaney's Pages, tucked between a florist and an old movie theater. Its window display held a stack of worn novels, a globe with faded countries, and a hand-lettered sign that read, "We believe in second chances." I paused. There it was. My sign. I pushed open the door. A bell chimed, low and melodic. Inside, it smelled like old paper and cedar. The kind of place where stories didn't just live, they exhaled. A man stood behind the counter, tall but slightly stooped, with graying hair and a weathered face. He was arranging a stack of poetry books with deliberate care. He looked up. For a moment, time folded. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. Recognition. Not instant, but deep. Like a forgotten song surfacing in a dream. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cautious, but kind. I stepped forward, my hands trembling. "My name is Olivia," I said softly. "Olivia Parker. But I think you knew me by another name." He stared at me. No smile. No frown. Just the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. "I found the photo," I continued. "And the letter. From you. To my mother." Still, silence. "My Aunt Evelyn told me you were here." He sat down slowly, as if the truth had struck him in the knees. He began, but his voice cracked. He looked away, then back, his eyes shining. "You have her eyes. Catherine's. But your voice. That's mine." I felt something rupture in my chest. Years of longing, confusion, grief. All of it, rising. "Why didn't you fight for me?" The words escaped before I could tame them. He shook his head, eyes wet now. "I tried. God, I tried. But your mother, she had everything. Lawyers, a husband, a story. And I had a bookstore dream and a mistake I couldn't undo. We stood in silence, the air thick with 35 years of separation. I thought about you every day, he whispered. On your birthday, I lit a candle. Every year. I thought I was just broken, I said. You were never broken, he replied. You were stolen. That did it. We both wept, there among the books. And for the first time in my life, I felt what I'd been searching for in every room, every look, every silence. Belonging, we sat for hours in that little bookstore, the world outside slowing to a hush. Marcus made tea loose-leaf chamomile, the kind that left petals floating like confetti in the cup. The air smelled of pages and peace. There were no grand confessions. No sudden surge of reclaimed time. Just two people carefully stitching the edges of a torn fabric, one slow word at a time. I didn't know how to look for you, he said, voice worn but steady. I didn't know what name they gave you, what life they built around the silence. I didn't know you existed, I replied. Until a week ago, I thought everything was just my fault. He winced. That's the cruelest part. The way they let you carry that weight alone. I asked him questions. About the past. About my mother. About that one photograph, taken before she decided I was a secret better kept in a box. She came to me just after you were born, he said. Told me Richard would raise you as his. Said it was best that way. No confusion. No tug-of-war. He ran a hand over his face, eyes distant. I was young, scared. I didn't know how to fight someone who made certainty look so righteous. We fell into silence again. Then he stood. Come here, he said. He led me to a small corner of the shop, near the poetry section. There, nestled between two shelves, was a wooden cabinet. He opened it gently, revealing what he called his memory shelf. Inside were fragments of a daughter he never got to hold. A hospital bracelet with the name Baby Girl D. A baby shoe, just one. A music box shaped like a swan. A newspaper clipping about a children's recital. I was in the photo, blurry in the background. And letters. Dozens. All addressed to my Olivia. None mailed. I touched them with reverence. Every line he'd written, every keepsake he'd saved, this was the childhood I could have had. Not perfect. Not rich. But true. Why didn't you send the letters? I asked. He looked down. Because every time I tried, I was told to leave well enough alone. That I'd ruin your life. That you'd be confused, or scared, or worse, angry. And I was already drowning in guilt. I pulled out one of the letters, dated my 10th birthday. The ink was smudged in places, as if his hands had trembled or tears had stained the page. Happy birthday, Olivia. I wonder if you still have the same laugh you did when you were a baby, wild and bright like a sparkler. I want you to know I think of you every day. That I'm trying to be a man worth finding, in case you ever come looking. Love. Dad. I had never called anyone that and meant it. But as I whispered the word now, Dad, something inside me settled. He looked up, eyes wide. Say that again. Dad, I repeated, this time with a smile that felt like dawn. We stood there, two souls who had circled each other through decades of silence, now beginning to speak in a language made of old grief and new hope. I left the store just after sunset, the letters bundled in my bag like a map to somewhere better. I didn't know what I'd do next, not exactly. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going back into silence. I returned home 2 days later, a different woman than the one who had left. My gait slower, but sure. My eyes no longer darting toward shadows. I had found something real. And once you've tasted that kind of truth, the artificial sweetener of pretense becomes impossible to swallow. My house greeted me like an old friend, quiet and waiting. I set down my bag and placed the bundle of letters on the kitchen table. I stared at them for a long moment, then lit a candle beside them, not as a vigil, but as a signal. Let the reckoning begin. I didn't respond to the calls or texts. Not yet. I needed them to sit in their silence a little longer, to stew in the discomfort they'd curated for me for most of my life. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to echo louder than their lies. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse, pulled property records, dug up every legal scrap tied to Richard and Catherine Parker's estate. I'd half expected locked doors, sealed files. But arrogance breeds carelessness, and they had never imagined I would look. And there it was. My name, Olivia and Delaney, changed legally to Olivia Catherine Parker when I was 2 years and 5 months old. There had been no adoption, just a name change, a rewrite of the story. They hadn't taken me legally. They'd taken me bureaucratically, with forged forms and favors, with power, with fear. I made copies, neatly, methodically, every document, every trace. I built a file not to burn down the house of cards, but to watch them squirm when the wind blew through. I posted one photo on social media that night, the one from the bookstore. Me, standing in front of the sign that read Delaney's pages, holding a book titled Inheritance. No caption. Just that. Within minutes, Julia called. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Are you seriously doing this right now?" I replied with a photo of the letter to my mother, the one Marcus had written when he relinquished his rights. Then I blocked her number. An hour later, Daniel left a voicemail. "Olivia, come on. Let's talk. This is family. We all have skeletons." Family. They still thought this was a matter of dirty laundry, of discretion. But I wasn't airing secrets. I was reclaiming my name. The next morning, I stood outside my parents' house. The air smelled of dew and discontent. I rang the bell once. My mother opened the door. Her face paled. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "Then why?" "I'm here to return what doesn't belong to me." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside it, the fake name, the false claim, the old lies. "I'm Olivia and Delaney. You knew that. You buried that. But I won't carry it anymore." She reached for it, but I held it back. "No, not this time. You don't get to rewrite it again." Her lip trembled, but no apology came. Of course not. Apologies require vulnerability, and my mother wore armor made of old pride and curated perfection. "I found him," I said. "He remembered me. Every year. You remembered me when it was convenient." Still, silence. "I just thought you should know what it feels like," I added. "To be seen." Then I turned and walked away. She didn't call after me. She never had. The walk from their porch back to my car felt like crossing a bridge made of glass, fragile, but necessary. Each step carried the weight of years I'd spent convincing myself I was lucky to be chosen, when really I had been silenced. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. Through the windshield, I watched the curtains move slightly. She was watching me, even now. But she wouldn't come outside. My mother never ran after things. Not even her lies. I thought about driving straight home. About retreating into my little sanctuary of letters and lavender-scented courage. But something stopped me. The house I grew up in, the one that watched me practice dance routines in the living room and sob silently into my pillow when everyone forgot my art exhibition, was just 5 blocks away. I hadn't walked through it in years. Not since I moved out, carrying with me only a suitcase and an invisible ledger of all the ways I had tried to earn love. I drove there without thinking. The house was still there, smaller than I remembered. The white paint now flaking, the roses I used to trim every spring growing wild and stubborn. I parked across the street. Just a look, I told myself. But I got out of the car. Neighbors were out with strollers and dogs, but I didn't see any familiar faces. Good. I didn't want questions. The new family had painted the door a cheerful yellow. Wind chimes clinked gently on the porch. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk and stared. A girl came to the window, a toddler no older than 3. She waved at me. I waved back. For a moment, I imagined telling her story. About a girl who grew up in that house and fought every day to be seen. A girl who was handed a script but rewrote the ending. A girl who once believed being chosen was enough. And then I let it go. I wasn't here for vengeance. I was here to remember who I used to be and to finally bless the soil that grew me, even if it never nurtured me. That evening, I started sorting the letters Marcus had written me. There were dozens. Written on napkins, old receipt paper, legal pads, once even the back of a library flyer. He'd saved them all, dated and folded with care. There was one that stood out. Dated the day I turned 16. Olivia. Today you're 16. I wonder if you're celebrating with friends. If your mother told you how brave you are. I bet you don't even know you're mine. That thought breaks me. But I also hope it's kept you safe. If you ever find me, I'll be here. Always. Reading, writing, hoping. Love. Dad. I ran my fingers over the words as if I could reach through time and offer that man a fragment of hope. He didn't know I'd spent that birthday crying in the school bathroom because Julia had told all her friends I wasn't really part of the family. That I'd come home to a single cupcake and silence, everyone too busy to notice. But he had remembered. Even from the shadows, he had remembered. I placed the letter in a frame and set it on my bookshelf. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because I was finally building a home filled with truth. And the truth deserved a place of honor. 3 days passed before anyone from my family dared to confront me face to face. It was Julia, of course. She showed up on a Wednesday, uninvited, unannounced, just like old guilt. I found her standing at my front door with a tray of lemon bars, the same kind she used to bake with Mom during holidays, like sweetness could undo cruelty. I thought we could talk, she said. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She took that as permission and stepped inside anyway. The house seemed to shrink around us. Julia had always had a way of making spaces feel smaller. Her presence was like perfume you couldn't scrub off, familiar, cloying, and a little too much. You've made quite the mess, she said as she set the tray on my counter, her tone light but her eyes sharp. No, I replied. I've uncovered one. She sighed. What do you even want, Olivia? An apology? Money? Public humiliation. I want the truth to matter, I said. For once. She crossed her arms, the same defensive stance she used in high school debates. You were always the emotional one, she said. And you were always the manipulative one, I replied calmly. Let's not pretend we're meeting for the first time. Julia looked like she'd been slapped, but the moment passed quickly. I get it, okay? You found your long-lost father. Good for you. But don't drag the whole family through the mud for something that happened before you could spell your own name. You mean before they gave me a new one? The silence that followed was cold and cavernous. I read the will, I said after a pause. The one Daniel mentioned. You knew they left me out of it. That wasn't my decision. But you didn't object. She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. You weren't supposed to find out. There it was. The sentence that explained everything. You weren't supposed to find out. Not about Marcus. Not about the name. Not about the will. You know what hurts the most? I said, my voice quieter now. That when they stripped me of my name, my inheritance, and even my place at the table, you all stood by and watched. And when I questioned it, you called me dramatic. Julia bit her lip. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. They thought they were protecting you, she whispered. No, I corrected. They were protecting themselves. From the inconvenience of me. From the risk of love that required effort. From the guilt they never had the courage to face. She took a step toward me. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said. But it doesn't fix anything. And it didn't. Because some wounds don't close. They become part of your architecture. Silent staircases leading nowhere. Locked doors you never try to open again. Julia left without finishing her lemon bar. I didn't touch them either. Some sweetness carries too much salt. That night, I wrote Marcus a letter. Dad. Today Julia came. She said the word sorry, but it felt like she borrowed it from someone else's story. I wanted to tell you, Your words have filled more gaps than their gestures ever could. I've started dreaming again. Not of escape, but of creation. You gave me that. Thank you. Love. Olivia. I sealed the letter and placed it with the others. One day, I'd give them all to him. For now, I needed them to remind me who I really was. And who I would never be again. There's a place I go when the weight of memory becomes too loud. It's not far, an old art museum tucked in the quieter part of the city, with crumbling archways and velvet rope lines that haven't moved in years. The kind of place that smells like dust, varnish, and a century of restraint. It had been my sanctuary long before I knew why I needed one. The security guard at the front, Gerald, greeted me with a nod. Back to the Forgotten Wing? He asked. Always, I replied. The wing wasn't officially called that, but it held pieces no one came to see: cracked sculptures, faded canvases, anonymous sketches signed only with initials. Art that had been buried under the weight of more important names. I knew how that felt. I wandered through the room slowly, letting each forgotten piece tell its story. A half-finished portrait, a marble bust with its jaw chipped, a tapestry unraveling at the corners. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. And sometimes, honesty is more beautiful than polish. I paused at a painting I'd always returned to, a small oil canvas of a woman standing alone in a garden, her face turned away, hands clenched at her sides. No plaque, no artist. Just a frame and a feeling. I used to wonder what she was looking at. Now I knew. The door that was finally closing behind her. Back home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old sketchbooks. They were tucked in a box labeled miscellaneous, buried beneath tax files and broken chargers. Inside, the pages were filled with memories rendered in pencil and ink, scenes from childhood, imagined landscapes, dreams I never spoke aloud. There was one drawing I barely remembered making, a house with no walls, only windows. Every room visible. No privacy, just exposure. I had titled it, "Everyone Can See, but No One Looks." I sat with that image for a long time, wondering how I had understood so much back then, before the world taught me to forget myself. I picked up a pencil, and I began to draw again. Not for show, not for approval, but because creating is how I remember who I am when everyone else has tried to rewrite me. The next morning brought an email from a name I didn't recognize. Subject, Delaney Inquiry. Dear Miss Parker, or Delaney, if you prefer. My name is Dr. Ann Whitmore. I'm a genealogist and historian currently working on a project involving family inheritance disputes and name changes in the 1980s. Your case came to my attention through some archival data shared by a colleague. If you're willing, I'd love to speak with you. I believe your story may have broader implications. Warm regards, Anne. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a question. Broader implications? My first instinct was to retreat, to guard what I'd found so fiercely I couldn't lose it again. But then I remembered the woman in the painting. Her hands clenched, her body still facing the garden. And I realized, maybe it was time to turn around, to be seen. Not as the family's shadow or the forgotten girl, but as the woman who found her name and made it louder than their silence. I replied to Anne's email the next day. Not because I trusted her, but because her words didn't come with the familiar sharpness of obligation. There was no "we're family" or "for your own good." Just curiosity and care. That was rare enough to deserve an answer. We agreed to speak by phone. When it rang, I hesitated for just a breath before answering. Her voice was warm, precise, like someone who'd spent her life navigating through the fog of forgotten names. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said. I know this must be a tender time. That small acknowledgement, tender, not chaotic, put me at ease. She explained she was working on a research project about undocumented custody changes during the late 70s and 80s, arrangements that skirted legal systems under the guise of family secrecy. She said my situation wasn't unique, though each version of it carried its own scars. "You're not alone," she said gently. "But most stories like yours never make it past the family dinner table." "Mine never even made it to the dinner table," I replied. "Just passed in whispers behind the kitchen door. And asked if I'd be willing to share documents, letters, photos, the legal name change forms. I agreed, with the condition that I remain anonymous for now." She understood. Before we hung up, she asked one final question. "If you could write a letter to the girl you were at 8 years old, the one in the photograph with the dog, what would you say?" The question hollowed me. I didn't answer right away. But that night, I lit a candle and wrote her a letter. "Dear little me, you were never the problem. They will make you feel like a mistake in the shape of a child. They'll call your curiosity defiance, your sadness ingratitude, your dreams a phase. But hold on, because one day, you'll find the key they tried to bury. You'll open a door they thought they'd bricked shut. And on the other side, there will be someone waiting who never stopped hoping to see you again. He's your real father. And you? You are real too. With love and fire. Olivia." I folded the letter and placed it beside the framed one from Marcus. 2 pieces of a timeline finally making peace with each other. A week passed. I worked. I painted. I called Marcus every other evening and we spoke of ordinary things, weather, books, the absurd joy of rediscovery. He sent me a photograph from my 2nd birthday, me with cake on my cheeks, him kneeling behind me, mid-laugh. The first time I'd seen him smile like that. He titled the email, "Proof We Were Real." That night, I dreamed of a different childhood, not perfect, but honest. A house where truth lived in the open, where names weren't rewritten for convenience. I woke with tears on my cheeks. But not sadness. Gratitude. Because somehow, against all odds, the girl in the photograph had found her way home. The silence from the Parkers had stretched into a kind of standoff. Julia hadn't returned. Daniel's texts stopped coming. Even my mother's carefully curated posts on social media went quiet, as if she were holding her breath under glass. But I knew them too well. They weren't retreating. They were regrouping. Which is why I wasn't surprised when I received a certified letter in the mail with my father's, Richard's, name in bold on the top of the envelope. Inside, a single-page letter and a formal request for acknowledgement. No greeting. No warmth. Just control disguised as clarity. "Olivia, we are aware of your recent activity and the unnecessary attention it may bring. While we do not dispute the emotional complexity of your discovery, we ask that you refrain from further action that could harm the family's reputation. Let the past remain the past. We remind you that you were raised in comfort, provided for, and educated, circumstances many are not afforded. There is no need for further disruption. Please acknowledge receipt of this letter and confirm your agreement to maintain family privacy. RP." There it was again. The familiar threat wrapped in etiquette. The reminder that my survival had been conditional. I read the letter 3 times. The first with anger. The second with sorrow. The third with a clarity I didn't expect. This wasn't about keeping peace. This was about keeping power. So I didn't respond. Instead, I printed a copy of the letter, signed my name at the bottom, not in agreement, but in defiance, and added one handwritten sentence. "I owe you nothing." Then I folded it into an envelope and mailed it back. Let them feel the cold echo of their own words. That evening, I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "You sound like you've seen a ghost," he said. "I saw the living kind," I replied. "The ones who haunt you with expectation, not regret." He listened quietly as I told him about the letter. "I'm proud of you," he said when I finished. "They tried to own you. You're not letting them. I'm tired of being bought with memories I didn't make." There was a pause. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I'd like to come visit." My breath caught. "You would? I think it's time I saw the life you've built. And maybe you could show me some of those drawings." My chest warmed with something that had been missing for decades. "Okay," I said softly. Yes. He would come in a week. 7 days. I began cleaning the house, not for show, but in the same way you light a candle before someone sacred arrives. I sorted my old paintings, cooked recipes I hadn't made since college. I even bought fresh sheets and tucked a small book of poetry beside the guest bed, preparing not for a guest, but for the man who once wrote to a girl he couldn't raise and who now would meet the woman she had become. Marcus arrived on a Saturday under a sky that felt impossibly wide. He stepped out of a modest rental car wearing a worn leather jacket and carrying a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He looked older than the man in the photographs, but not smaller. If anything, the years had given him gravity. "Hi," I said as he reached the front steps. "Hi," he replied, his voice softer than I remembered, like the hush of an unopened book. We stood there for a beat too long, two strangers who shared a face, a silence, a fractured history. Then I stepped aside, and he walked through the door I had spent my whole life guarding. Inside, everything was prepared, but nothing rehearsed. I had made tea, set out shortbread cookies, and laid the letters he had written in a neat bundle on the coffee table. He stared at them for a long time. "God," he whispered. "I thought you might throw them away." "I almost did," I admitted. But then I realized they were mine. He turned to me then, eyes damp but unashamed. "I missed so much. And yet," I said, "you left me more than they ever did." We talked for hours. About nothing at first. My neighborhood. His bookstore. The price of avocados. We laughed awkwardly. Then more easily. The fear began to melt, leaving behind only wonder. Eventually, we wandered into the heavier rooms. I told him about Julia and Daniel, about how each act of loyalty I'd offered had been met with indifference or, worse, silence. He listened. I showed him my sketchbooks, the ones filled with images of empty doorways, of faceless girls climbing staircases that led nowhere. He studied each page as though it were sacred scripture. "These were messages," he said. "You were speaking even when no one heard you." Later, he asked if he could take one drawing with him. A simple one. A little girl sitting on a swing, her back turned, hair flying as if she might lift off. "She's not alone anymore," he said. "She just doesn't know it yet." That night, I gave him the guest room. He closed the door gently, but I could still feel his presence down the hallway, a quiet promise of safety I hadn't realized I needed. I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the kitchen and found myself standing by the window, staring out at the moonlit garden. My phone buzzed beside me. A text from an unknown number. "You've made your point. Are you done now?" No name, but I didn't need one. I could feel my mother's tight handwriting in every word. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to my bookshelf, retrieved the framed letter Marcus had written on my 16th birthday, and set it beside my bed. Let them rage in the dark. I had found my light. Morning came slow, gentle. The kind of dawn that filters through curtains like forgiveness. I brewed coffee before Marcus woke. Not out of habit, but because the scent reminded me of a life I was finally choosing. One where love was brewed, not bargained for. He emerged quietly, his hair tousled, his eyes still carrying the sleep of a man who dreamed of his daughter for too many years and was now afraid to blink her away. "Morning," he said. "Coffee?" I offered, sliding a mug across the table. He nodded, cradling the cup like it held more than just warmth. For a while we sipped in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that only exists between two people who've run out of lies. "I had a dream," he said finally, "that you were 5, and you were painting a sky with no sun." I looked at him. "Why no sun?" He shrugged. "Maybe because you hadn't found it yet." I wanted to say, "You were the sun, I just didn't know where to look." But I let the silence carry it for me. Later that day, we visited the town. I showed him the museum, the forgotten wing. He stood in front of the faceless woman in the garden for nearly 10 minutes, then whispered, "She's waiting for the truth." I didn't tell him she had once been me. We passed the diner, the library, even the old elementary school. Every place had held a version of me. The girl who smiled because she didn't know she was allowed to cry. The teenager who worked twice as hard to be half as loved. The woman who packed up her worth and walked away quietly. He watched me absorb each place like someone visiting sacred ruins. "You still carry her," he said as we sat in a park bench, watching kids run across the grass. "I do," I admitted. "But she's lighter now." He smiled, and I saw it again, that flicker of something lost and returned. "You know," he said, "you were always mine. Even when they changed your name, even when they tried to erase me, I still saw you." I didn't know how much I needed to hear that. He placed his hand over mine. "You deserved more than survival." The breeze picked up just then, brushing my hair across my cheek like the sky was listening. That evening, we cooked dinner together. Spaghetti, too much garlic, laughter that tasted new. We toasted not to the past, but to the versions of ourselves that waited patiently to be found. "To the girl who kept painting skies," he said. "And to the man who waited beneath them," I added. As the candle between us flickered, I realized something extraordinary. This wasn't the end of my story. This was where it began again. With my real name on my lips. And no one left to silence it. 2 days after Marcus arrived, someone else did. I was in the garden, pruning the lavender bushes that had gone wild with the sudden bloom of June. Marcus was inside, organizing the bookshelves he had offered, half joking, to alphabetize them, and I had let him, curious to see if he could impose order on the chaos I'd grown used to. I heard the car before I saw it. The engine sputtered, unfamiliar. A slow pull into the driveway, like hesitation had taken the wheel. Julia. Of course it was. She stepped out dressed too neatly for an unannounced visit, her hair pulled back, lips tight with some rehearsed purpose. Marcus came to the door just as I opened it. When he saw her, he froze. And she blinked as if she'd walked into a mirror she hadn't expected to reflect. "Oh," she said. Her voice faltered. "So it's true." "Yes," I replied. "He's real." Marcus didn't speak. He simply watched her the way a man does when he sees someone who once helped erase him. "I didn't come to fight," Julia said quickly. I needed to see it. For myself." "Why?" I asked. "Because," she exhaled sharply. "Because I think Mom is breaking." "She broke a long time ago," I said. "She just got really good at pretending the pieces still fit." Julia winced, but said nothing to argue. Instead, she looked at Marcus. "I remember you," she said, voice quieter now. "From the recital. You were in the crowd." He nodded once. "I wasn't supposed to see you," she added. "But I did." I didn't understand back then. "And now?" I asked. "Now I think I do," she said. "And I don't know what to do with that." She stepped forward, handed me a small envelope. "This is from her. She asked me to give it to you." I didn't reach for it. "You can leave it on the porch." Julia's hand trembled as she placed it on the step. "She's not well. I hope she finds peace," I said. "But that's her journey, not mine." She hesitated, then looked at Marcus again. "I'm sorry for what happened." Marcus studied her for a moment. "And what had happened, Julia?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "I think we all forgot how to tell the truth," she said. And then she turned and left. We watched her car disappear around the corner. Neither of us spoke until the stillness returned. Later that night, I opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of stationery, ivory with gold trim. My mother's handwriting, unmistakable. "Olivia. I did what I thought was right. I'm sorry it wasn't what you needed. I cannot change what was done. But I hope you understand, even if you never forgive. Mother." No salutation. No signature of warmth. Just a vague attempt at closure. I placed the letter beside the others, not because I needed to keep it, but because some ghosts are better cataloged than carried. And then I returned to the living room, where Marcus was reading a book about stars. "Do you believe in fate?" I asked him. He looked up, smiling gently. "I believe in persistence. Sometimes it looks a lot like fate." We sat together, the silence not empty, but full of things finally named. The day after Julia's visit, Marcus and I took a walk through the old trail near the reservoir. A path I'd once avoided because it held too many memories of Daniel dragging me along when I just wanted to be still. Now I chose it freely. The trees were thick with leaves, the air heavy with the smell of soil and sun-warmed stone. We walked in silence for a long stretch, listening to the gravel shift beneath our feet, the occasional rustle of squirrels darting into the underbrush. Marcus carried a small notebook in his jacket pocket. I noticed he kept pulling it out, jotting something down, then tucking it away again. "What are you writing?" I finally asked. He looked sheepish. "Observations. Fragments. Bits of your story I want to remember." "For what?" He hesitated. "I think I want to write about this. Not as some expose, not to shame anyone, but to show what healing can look like when it begins late, but still begins." I nodded. "You think it could help someone else?" "I hope it will." I picked up a pebble, smooth and oval, and turned it over in my palm. "If you write it, I don't want to be the girl who was just lost. I want to be the girl who found her way out." He smiled. "Then that's who she'll be." Back at home, I began sorting through my things not out of need, but instinct. Something inside me wanted to let go of what no longer fit the life I was building. Old clothes, untouched kitchen gadgets, knickknacks gifted out of obligation more than affection. I packed them into boxes, labeling each with sharp black marker. Then I came across a small velvet box. Inside, a necklace. A silver chain with a tiny charm shaped like a star. Julia had given it to me on my 13th birthday, the year she'd taken my place in the school play after convincing our mother I wasn't ready. I almost tossed it into the donation pile. But then I stopped. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I realized I didn't feel hurt anymore. Not numb. Not indifferent. Just free. That kind of release is its own kind of healing. That night, Marcus and I sat on the porch with mugs of mint tea, watching the fireflies rise like tiny lanterns from the grass. "Do you think you would have raised me differently?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I would have tried. I don't know if I would have done it perfectly, but I would have let you ask questions. I would have told you your name. Sometimes I wonder what kind of person I'd be if I'd known the truth from the start." He looked at me, steady and sure. "I think you'd still be this person. Maybe a little softer around the edges, but still brave. Still unwilling to be small." That made me smile. Not because it flattered me, but because it felt true. The kind of truth I'd waited a lifetime to hear. And that night, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I slept without dreaming of doorways or empty rooms.